I want to just touch a little bit on the mechanism of making that distinction for people in their mind. Am I available to the infinite possibility that is here with this constant stream, this constant flow of this information that is moving through my system? How can I know that I'm tapping into what is meant for me in my highest versus if I'm driving it or thwarting it or distorting it in some way? Hello again. Welcome back to The Art of Awakening. I'm your host, Dr. Sue Morter, and today we are joined with a remarkable guest whose work bridges the realms of cutting-edge science and timeless Ayurvedic wisdom to explore the profound potential of healing and so much more. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. John. Dr. John Douillard is a globally recognized Ayurvedic expert, author, and founder of LifeSpa.com, which is a leading resource in evidence-based Ayurvedic healthcare. Looking forward to diving in and speaking to him about all of that and explaining some of those things to you. With over 40 years of experience, he's pioneered the integration of ancient wellness practices with modern science, empowering people worldwide to achieve self-sufficient health and longevity. An accomplished author of 7 books, including the international bestseller Body, Mind, and Sport, Dr. John has reshaped wellness and with his expertise in digestion, digestive health, circadian medicine, and holistic detoxification, amongst many other things. His groundbreaking podcast, Ayurveda Meets Modern Science podcast, explores the intersection of consciousness, quantum science, and ancient healing, inspiring a global audience to live healthier, fuller lives. So please join me in welcoming Dr. John Douillard to the show. John, hello.
Hi, Sue. So nice to be here.
It's so great to have you here. I want to share with everyone that he's not just an amazing guy and a world-famous doctor in some ancient principles and practices. He's also an amazing father and friend. He's a long-term meditator, and I've known Dr. John since I think about the year 2000. We probably met in 2000 at meditation retreats. We were in the same meditation community, and we were traveling to India. We were crossing paths all the time, and inside of a beautiful exploration of what consciousness truly has to offer in terms of living this full life that we are made for. And so in connecting with John over the years, every time I'm with him, it is a more beautiful exchange. It is more settled in the wisdom of life and application. So this isn't going to be just a conversation about information. This is a man who has lived these principles in ways, raised a family with these principles, and has taught hundreds and thousands of people on an intimate level about the work that he stands for and is all about. So I'm thrilled to bring you this individual. I know that he will offer you, if nothing else, just the vibration of being in his presence will bring you to another version of life. So that's what the Art of Awakening is all about. So, with no pressure on that, John, speak to us a little bit about your exploration of spontaneous quantum healing and just what you would like to share about that in terms of the larger picture of life.
Well, thank you, Sue, and for everything you do, and also creating this platform where I can talk about that sort of, kind of a no holes barred approach to kind of diving deep into what I'm really interested in. And of course, there's in Ayurvedic medicine, you have to heal the body so the body can be less dense, establish its own self-awareness. And of course, you want to fix your heartburn and back pain and all these problems we have physically, but that's really a means to an end. And the end is to really thin the veil between the physical and the spiritual. We don't have to die to figure out we're a soul, we're a spirit, which is kind of what you kind of like, when I die, I hope all this stuff is right, that I'm going to be a spirit. Well, in Ayurveda, they were like, the whole idea of Ayurveda was to refine this human instrument. First, get it healthy, and then refine it. And then once you refine it, you can begin to enhance your self-awareness and begin to experience and have a level of awareness of the most subtle things. And that's the really cool thing about Ayurveda, was the more subtle it was, the more powerful it is. Like the microbiome, right? We can't see the little critters, but the Rig Veda 4,500 years ago wrote about these invisible bacteria they called krimi. And they said, don't kill them. They can be good, they can be bad. Fix the host, change the environment, which is so beautiful. We have Nobel Prize winning circadian medicine now, and all about aligning our biological clocks with nature's circadian rhythms. We can't see those rhythms of nature, and yet they govern not only the birds flying south and the whales migrating, they govern us directly. There's biological clocks that turn on and turn off at different times of day, and it's critically important. I remember when I was in India the very first time in 1986, I got so lucky. I went to India for a 4-week vacation and ended up to try to learn Ayurvedic medicine, and I got invited to stay there permanently, and I did. I closed my practice in Boulder, and by a little scratchy phone, no one could even really hear each other, but I didn't come back. And my teacher was a pulse diagnosis expert, and so I would travel around with him, see patients all day long with him, and kind of like a little puppy dog followed him around. And along the way, he was teaching me the pulse. And one of the lessons was he didn't really teach me like, do this, do this, do this. It was more like, take your pulse 50 times a day. And if you have a question, ask me. That was basically the main program. And so I would take my pulse 50 times a day, and I would go, and again, you dive into the subtle. You start becoming more aware of the subtle. So I started noticing that my pulse would change at different times of day. It was different, morning, night, and evening. And I said, I noticed that this is changing different times. And he got all excited and started talking about circadian rhythms and times of day and how the sunlight changes from one time of day, and that affects the physiology at different times of day. And those are the circadian rhythms. And I'm going like, wait a minute, you're telling me that the same rhythms of nature that the birds fly south because they follow them and the whales are migrating, they're actually in me as well, and I can actually feel them? You got to be kidding me. Like, I can feel those rhythms, and I can tell if I'm in or out of balance. That was the thing that got me completely hooked. So in Ayurveda, the more subtle it is, the more powerful it is. And that's the beauty of when you begin to understand. And I just wrote an article last week about research done at Harvard and UCLA. And in Ayurvedic medicine, they talk about cycles of life, right? When you're a kid until like 18 years old, you can roll downstairs, you don't get hurt, everything's wonderful, right? Your body's elastic, like a big rubber band. So you're just full on growing. Then after that, you go into what we call the pitta, fiery, competitive, make a living, raise your kids, all that kind of stuff. And by that time, you're very busy, and it's not really the time for a spiritual life. You're raising your kids. Of course, you want to have your foot in that boat of spirituality along the way. But then the last part of your life, we call it the vata time, which is governed by air and space and akasha. This is when Ayurveda says you're most equipped to have a spiritual life. And most people are like, yeah, but you're old, your body's broken. You can barely think anymore. How can you have a spiritual life? And that was so cool to find research at UCLA and Harvard that said that it's not in spite of aging, it's because of aging that we are more inclined to a spiritual life. We're more capable. It's not that just like, I want to find God before I die, and like it's an urgent request, I got to figure this out. It's actually your body's physiology is changing to become more light, less dense, and you have the ability to thin that veil between the physical and spiritual, refine this human instrument, and perceive the subtle energy that is really, inside us and around us. It's that underlying truth of us. Ayurveda is life, and Veda is truth. That's the whole thing, is about finding the truth of who you are, which is, sourced in consciousness. And Ayurveda says that when you forget that your consciousness, that your feet, that you're sourced in that consciousness, that's the cause of disease. And that's what I think what we could dive into.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I spend my time really bridging that gap that has been created only in our consciousness, that we are separate from source and that we're trying to find our way to source, when actually it's about us allowing, us settling in to the perception of the source that is running right through us. Now, you're in your pulse diagnostic, disposition, you became aware of that very early on, and most people are not. They're not aware that source and I are one, that there isn't a gap, there isn't a separation, and so we operate as if there is. And so when we are approaching this awakening to the bridge between the realms, and actually there is only one realm, right? We've generated veils in terms of what we can perceive, in terms of our understanding of who we are and what's going on. And as we thin these veils, what we're doing is waking to the oneness that has always been, that is the truth of who we are. And so when you find that you are working with people toward this end of refining our accessibility to the invisible realm. I always speak about the fact that the invisible world is the real world. This is a reflection of it, and is only reflecting as much as to us as what we are, the circuitry that we have ignited to perceive it. And so I'm always over here building circuits with people, telling them how to find these refined energies, to find something more subtle, a nuance that's running right through your system that you just haven't been paying attention to. And so as soon as you start paying attention to it, you start acclimating and you start being able to perceive these things. So you're doing something similar from a little bit different perspective in how we're approaching this. But what is it that you find happening with people as they begin to work with the Ayurvedic, principles and start finding that refinement in their lives? What are some of the first things that people start perceiving or realizing or experiencing that begins to set them more free in ways of understanding the bigness of their being, in whatever ways that might show up for them?
Well, I think that, you know, and I think that you also talk about the koshas, which are the sheaths that we have created to make to g- to give us the opportunity to be distracted. I guess you could call it that as well. Um, but we have the physical body on the most outer layer. It's called the Anamaya kosha, and then the Pranamaya kosha, and then the Mano kosha, which is your mind. And then underneath that is called the Great Barrier Sheath, is what they call it in Vedic, circles. And it's the barrier sheath because it's the barrier between your mind, which is thoughts, very light, very subtle, but loves the senses, loves to be distracted by the outside world. Underneath that is the Vijnana Maya Kosha and the Ananda Maya Kosha, which are consciousness-based, field-based, And so the whole point of Ayurveda was and yoga, to use pranayama and breathing techniques to activate the pranamaya kosha, which just happens to be right between the body and the mind. It's no mistake. So the
Mm-hmm.
more that you use your breathing, and that is not only a tool for integrating the mind and body, it's also, there's interoreceptors on your diaphragm, which is the most powerful muscle in your body, that actually activates self-awareness. So it's not only just connecting the mind body, but it's also taking those first steps to self-awareness. And I think breathing techniques, which I teach a ton of, is so critical in this journey. Yoga is actually using the body to physically break up the density of the physiology so the prana can actually penetrate the density of the physical body, and also to create awareness of the mind, where you can actually, in a way, spin the chakras in the mind, turn the senses around so they're avenues of consciousness, bring in awareness inside versus being so distracted by them, only getting your satisfaction from your senses going outward, all that reward chemistry. So you have your pranamaya kosha, which is the yoga and the breathing, designed to really create a level of heightened awareness in the body, so it's functioning well. In the mind, so you have a level of clarity of the mind to see the difference between the truth and the non-truth. So the whole idea is to thin the anomyakosha, pranamyakosha, monomyakosha, and make that so light that you become aware of the Great Barrier Sheath, that block, that wall that separates you from your own consciousness. So the whole point is to get you to that level of awareness at that space. And once you become aware of that space, that junction point between field and physiology, consciousness and matter, once you're there, you're at that junction point. So if you took a light and you shined it in a doorway, the light would go into both rooms. It would go into both ways. So that's the idea, was to bring the light, the awareness to that junction point between the field and your physiology, right? So we all know that consciousness provokes matter, but at some point there's got to be a place where that fields of intelligence and consciousness become matter. In Ayurveda, that's called pragya parad, which is the mistake of the intellect. When the field becomes a physiology and the physiology forgets that it's field, that's the cause of disease. So the idea is that to fix it, you want to put some lamps in the doorways between field and physiology, between the fields of consciousness and that monomyakosha, the mental craziness. This is all about this crazy mind that keeps us distracted. So that's the goal, is to go to the gap between consciousness and matter. And we can dive into that, but there are many gaps. There's sunrise, there's sunset, there's the junction between the seasons, the equinox and the solstice. There's the gap in your pulse, there's the gap between your breath, the gap between your words. It just goes on and on and on. And, pranayama is breath is prana and yama is to hold, pause, or extend your breath. So the original Vedic seers understood that the longer you could create a gap between your breath, magical things happen. And we can dive into the science behind that, which is amazing. But I think first we just want to lay out the framework, which is that we have to find something that functions as both a particle, a manifested particle, and a field at the same time. And if you could find that thing and then put your attention on that thing, we're halfway there, right? And from there, comes in quantum consciousness and entanglement, and all these ways the body could heal spontaneously are now understood by Western science, which is kind of really cool. And that, I think, is what I'd love to dive into today.
Yes. So where would you like to start? Because I'm quite sure that our listeners would love to go in any of those directions. So, something that comes to mind is if someone were to find that space in between in their own life, walking and talking, so that they can relate to where we're starting, where we're diving into, how could they translate that into, okay, yeah, I can connect with this space, this gap in between, this one thing that he's saying I need to grab a hold of. How does someone begin to relate to that if they haven't been in the study and they haven't been in the exposure of these ancient concepts for as long as you have?
No, it's a great question. So let's fast forward to what the experience might be, and then we'll go back and figure out the science behind it. Okay, that's a really great way to start. So when we talk about self-inquiry, right, we're talking about the self-inquiry. We're not asking the mind anything. We're asking the self something, right? So the self is a non-thinking environment. And so when you're thinking, you're not experiencing what we're talking about. So it has to be a way to get you into a non-thinking place. And we can actually do a little experiment with that right now, which would be fun. We can actually do it everybody. We can do it together. So when you're looking, I'm going to give you this experience of not thinking, okay? And then what we're going to do is when we're in that non-thinking place, I want you to, a thought may come by. Let the thoughts go because they're not real. That's your mind. We want to go underneath your mind and get into that field of consciousness, particularly in that gap. So that's going to be a feeling of heart expansion, a feeling of comfort, a feeling of joy, a feeling of bliss. So what we're looking for is not the language of thinking. We're looking for the language of feeling. And that's the language of the soul. So when you actually start to feel, then you can do that. And if you were to engage in self-inquiry, which is a sort of a different avenue to get to where I want to go today, but how you would do that is you would ask a question like, who am I? Or, and then when you ask that question, then you let thoughts go by because your mind wants to answer that for you. But just wait until you actually have a feeling. Now, to get your mind out of the way, you sort of have to breathe it away. And studies show that when you actually breathe, particularly this technique, and there's many of them, your brainwaves shift into what's called the gamma state. And the gamma state is the altruistic state, the higher state of consciousness state. It's a non-thinking state. So we have to, and then after that state of gamma, you flip into about 10 minutes of parasympathetic dominance. And I've written articles about this, and I call it the 1-minute meditation, which is great for our culture, right? Because nobody has more than a minute for much these days because we're so busy, which is another big piece of the problem. So we're going to do 30 seconds of a breathing technique called Bhastrika, which is a bellows breath, and 30 seconds of being still. And while you're in that 30 seconds, you're going to notice that you're not thinking, and you can allow yourself to feel. So let's just first ask a question. Let's say any question you want. It's like don't ask for the lottery numbers because that's the thinking thing. But ask whatever question that you want. And then as you're in that place, and initiate the question now. Let's just take a minute and think about what question you want to ask the self. And then let it go. And then let this happen spontaneously, okay? So the bellows breath, just you watch me do it for a second, and we'll go from there. Bellows breath is just like a bellows, in, out, all the way, nothing fancy. It looks like this. Like that. And we'll do 30 of those. And then we'll be still for 30 seconds. That'll be a minute, okay? Does that sound good?
So just to instruct everybody's following along with us, so it's starting with the belly, low in the belly, and then reaching it up a full inhalation, and then an exhale, in and out through the nose. Yes?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And if you get dizzy, stop. If you feel good, you can increase the depth and a little bit the speed of it. But if you get a little dizzy or lightheaded, just slow it way down or just take a break. Maybe 15 seconds would be enough for some folks, and then you can stop, close your eyes, and just be still until we catch up with you. Okay?
Awesome.
All right.
So we're going to do
here
this
we go
together.
together. Let's sit still.
Excellent.
Here we go. And sit still and be perfectly still with your eyes closed. And just feel. And slowly open your eyes. And if that was a little like a taste of it, but if you want to do another 30 seconds of breathing and a little bit of a longer eyes closed meditation, and you can initiate your question again. And you might have all noticed that there wasn't a lot of thinking involved in that. There was just some kind of a natural state of just being still and being okay with being still. And that's the first level of awareness, is being still. And because that's non-thinking. And then from there, you can start to be aware of that stillness. And from there, you become aware of that stillness both within you and then aware of that stillness around you. And now you're starting to create a level of awareness of something else besides the thinking. You're actually being aware of this underlying field of intelligence. Now, in Western medicine, well, I call it not Western medicine, but let's call it quantum medicine, quantum physics. It's understood that your DNA are producing ultra-weak photon emissions, about 1,000 per minute. And unfortunately, many of those photon emissions coming out of your body, your DNA, are damaging because of DNA stress and DNA aging and shortening of telomeres and all of that. And but studies show that when you meditate and yoga and breathe, or we just did, the photon emissions that are incoherent start to dial down, and you're left with what are called coherent photon emissions. So you have two types of photon emissions, coherent and incoherent. And the ones that are incoherent can be damaging to you, but the ones that are coherent are actually, according to the science, carrying information throughout your body. Studies also show they're actually carrying our thoughts, because the nerve firing to one nerve to another nerve is just like slow compared to what we really do in life, Not that we all think wonderfully, but we're thinking fast, And that is carried by light, by these photon emissions, these particles of light. Well, studies also show something called the Bocon's phenomena, that these ultra-weak photon emissions are actually affected by our intention, that they can carry our intention. And you're like, wait a minute, what? You're telling me that if I yoga, breathe, and meditate, these damaging photon emissions dial down, the incoherent ones down. And we know that for a fact. We know that the telomere lengths, which are the Nobel Prize winning science by Elizabeth Blackburn, who found that when you're under stress, your telomeres shorten in length, which are the protective caps on your DNA, so you age faster. And she said, well, what if we studied meditation? What would happen to the telomere length? Would it work? Because we have science to know this is the mechanism of aging, or one of them. And then she's a Nobel Prize winning scientist, and she was like completely poo-pooed for studying meditation. How could you ever do something so silly? Well, she did it anyway, and she found that in many studies, but she found one study showed that the telomere length increased by 43% in one study and 30% in another. So we know that when you meditate, the DNA is different. We know that we're releasing less of these incoherent photon emissions. So you're releasing more of these coherent ones that carry the information, that carry the intelligence. And when you think about prayer, and there's so many studies on prayer, some of them work amazingly well, better than the best drug even, or not that they're the best, but but incredible science there. But then there are also studies that show prayer doesn't work at all. So it's like, how come it works sometimes, not work other times? Well, it might be the fact that who's doing the praying is releasing a lot of incoherent DNA photon emissions versus the coherent ones that actually carry the information. Now, photons don't care about things. They don't stop because there's a water bottle in the way or your body in the way. They're blasting through us like we don't even exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these photon emissions are able to move at great distances, and they carry information. So you could even make the case that you and I were having this conversation. I've been looking forward to it when I think you invited me a month or two or three ago. So I'm like, oh, I get to see Sue again. This is going to be amazing. So I had the intention to come and talk to you. So my photons were actually, believe it or not, because there's an intention, you were picking up on those photons. And anybody here watching might have also been part of this photon intentional mechanism that we're all connected. And in the quantum world, it's called entanglement. All these photons are entangled with each other because we had this intention to be connected here today. So a lot of us have already been introduced to each other which is sometimes why you meet somebody, I feel like I know you. Well, that's because you kind of have been having an interaction on
Mm.
this quantum subtle level for a very, very long time. So the the photons are both a field. They come from they're frequencies of light, and they're also particles of light. And when they go into our body, they can become very dense and particle-like. And when they're that way, they don't carry intelligence, they don't carry consciousness with them. They become more dense and incoherent. But when you actually carry coherent photons in your body, you're actually carrying the light into your body, right? So this is called, this is what Ayurveda says, that pragya parad, the mistake of the intellect, where the body forgets its consciousness. We have to wake the body up to the consciousness. Well, that's exactly how it works. We have something that functions as both a field and a particle together. And when it's a particle, according to the research, it doesn't carry information. But when it's a field, it does. So we want to restore the memory, the smriti it's called, of pure consciousness into every cell of the body. Well, how do you do that? Well, you do what we just did a little bit, create a level of silence, and then become aware of those states of feeling in a meditation. Keep dipping the cloth in the dye of that. And then you elicit an intention, right? Because we know that these photon emissions are affected by our intention. And the Vedas talked about this. They actually had mantras or sutras that they would literally use for distance healing. You know, when I was in India, we was a regular, every weekend we would go to a distance healer or some healer, and it was just standard practice that there'd be somebody around the corner or this place that would look at a picture of someone, maybe take your pulse and look at a picture and heal someone at great distances. It was just part of their culture. It was just normal to them.
Yeah.
And now we have a mechanism for how they may have done that. And in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there's a sutra. It's called Inner Light. It's interesting they use it as inner light because your photons are literally your inner light.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put your attention on that word, inner light, it actually has the ability to carry that intention at great distances. And I'll read to you what Patanjali says about inner light. It's kind of really interesting. It's inner light. This is from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It says inner light is when you meditate on that word, it has to do with distance healing, gaining knowledge of the subtle, hidden and remote. It's subtle as atoms, hidden as treasure, and remote as distant lands, is what they talked about, which is kind of really a cool way of describing how it's remote as distant lands. Which means these photons, this inner light, it doesn't have any relationship with space and time. It's underneath and beyond that. And that's where quantum entanglement comes in, which is sort of what quantum computing is going to be all about. Where quantum computing means that uses entanglement. So we talked about how these photons that I'm emitting, because I'm excited to talk to you, are entangled with you now, and anybody else who is tuning into this podcast is entangled with them. So as soon as we have a level of awareness of that subtle, coherent expression of those photons, they will instantaneously change the spin of the photons inside of you and everybody else listening, instantaneously, faster even than the speed of light. Einstein knew about this, and he called it spooky action at a distance, which he said because it's not possible that anything's faster than the speed of light. It screws up my whole theory of relativity. So what do I do with that? But that's what he called it, and he knew it was there. So there are things, consciousness was there before the Big Bang, so therefore it's before the speed of light. It's before space and time. So we have access to that. And that's what quantum entanglement is. So what they're already doing in quantum computing is, let's say I have my computer on now, but let's say somebody very far away, distant lands, hacked into my computer. That spin, because now our photons are entangled, instantaneously I'd get an alert that somebody spun my photons in the other direction. Therefore, someone has hacked into my computer and I would get a cyber alert. That's what cybersecurity is going to be about. This is the future of medicine and MRI scanning and diagnostics. It's really the future. It's a very real thing. And we're tapping into something that is unheard of, something that's faster than the speed of light. So to finish that, we have the idea that if you can go in and meditate and find a level of awareness at the junction between consciousness and matter, and you're doing it from a coherent photon emission place, then instantaneously the particles in your body that are entangled and related to you because they're in you would instantaneously change and therefore carry the spin that allows them to be coherent and carry that awareness. So that's sort of the mechanism and that's why Ayurveda had all these gap therapies, the gap therapies of, finding the gap between conscious matter and meditation, the space between the breath, the space between the words, the space between the seasons, space between day and night. All these were tools that ancient cultures revered and practiced and were there for that morning sunrise. They never missed the sunrise, So these are just ways of life to create resonance between you and the cycles of nature and the underlying intelligence that created those cycles of nature, which is in fact our own consciousness.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, what is the role of love, not as a sentiment, but love, and maybe we can define this in all of our efforts of dropping into a coherence that allows for a greater collective of photon density in a coherent fashion? How do you see love rolling into that?
I was teaching a course years ago at the Omega Institute on the East Coast, and I was talking about stuff like this, and I said that we're all love. Fundamentally, we're all just love. And someone said, "Can you prove that?" I was like, "No, I don't have any proof of that. But doesn't everybody just get that? Isn't that like a common understanding? Do I have to prove it?" And so I went back and proved it. So we now have really great science that shows that when you love and give and care for others, you produce these coherent biophoton emissions. You produce more positive, beneficial bacteria, less bad bacteria. You produce a longevity hormone called oxytocin, which creates longevity. There was a study done where folks were giving a gift, and one group of the gift gave in a hedonistic way where they wanted to get everybody to like them and they wanted to get praise and some reward from that gift giving. And the other group gave in a eudaimonic way where they gave in a gestalt, I don't have any need for any praise, in a way giving anonymously, just gave with the loving of giving with a big period at the end of it. And they found that when they gave in a hedonistic way, it actually had a negative effect on the people they were giving it to. So they could tell that you were just doing it for your own self-gratification, right? Mm. And when they gave in a eudaimonic way with no expectation, it actually had a positive effect on genetic code of the person they were giving to, and of course, a positive or a negative effect on us. Mm. So when you that's sort of the antithesis of love, when you it's manipulation, really. And unfortunately, this brain is kind of hardwired for manipulation. When you were a child, you had to figure out how to get your mom and dad to love you. So you manipulated them. And if you didn't do that, and they didn't love you, you would have wandered off into the jungle, got eaten by lions, and there'd be no people here. So there's a hard wire for us as we develop to want approval and attention from our outside surroundings, because that's our survival. But that's unconscious behavior. And in Ayurveda, they were like, we have to become conscious at some point, whether it be a rite of passage or something like that has to take place where you stop needing love and approval from the outside world and you start giving the love and being the love versus needing the love. And that's the transition that our culture doesn't let us do anymore, because we keep getting more of this incoming, right? Constant bombardment of stimulation and social media and bigger this and better this and more colorful this. And I can look, my body, I want to look pretty and everything to make us kind of, let the outside world dupe us into thinking we're going to somehow get some level of comfort or long-lasting peace, right? Or satisfaction. So that's what Ayurveda was. It's about becoming conscious. So you can wake up to the idea that love, when you actually let the love out, is a deep underlying expression of who we are. And when you do that, everything inside of you changes. The petals of the flower that are so tight and protective open up and they let something real out. And that gives you the first step in feeling open enough to perceive your own inner space. Because that love is bliss. I mean, there's so many quotes in the Vedic literature where they say, meditate, or you even do that breathing technique we just did, and they say, feel the city of bliss in your heart. That's the exact words. And when you feel that bliss, now you're feeling it. You're feeling that. And if you can start to replicate that on a regular basis, and you're feeling that bliss in your heart, then I feel that bliss in my body. Now I feel that bliss, and you can actually, there's a mudra called Kachari mudra, where you take your tongue and you put your tongue to the roof of your mouth, and that brings all that bliss up into your head. And so these are just all techniques to create an experience of love. And of course, my favorite one is an author way back in the early 1900s, Henry James, wrote a book, and Mr. Rogers took hold of this quote, and it was that what is the most important thing a human can do in this life? The three most important things a human can do. And the first one is to be kind. And the second most important thing a human can do is to be kind. And of course, the third one is also to be kind. So when you think about that as a model for life, you're like, wait a minute, let me think that through. I can be kind once, like someone's mean to me, sure, I can be kind. That's good, I can do that. Be kind, the second level of be kind means that, someone, I have to then be kind in all situations. And there's just situations where it's so hard to be kind. But I guess I could kind of figure out intellectually that I can be kind in pretty much every situation if I really try. But the third level of be kind is like you're a doormat. Everybody can just walk over you and just say, okay, thank you for running over me. That's wonderful. I love you, But what they're really talking about is that there's love, like you said, inside of our heart. That's the engine that drives self-awareness and thinning the veil between the physical and spiritual, and your ultimate level of contentment and satisfaction. And it can only come from the inside. That's the engine that makes that happen. So the last level of be kind means that basically no one has the power to take that away from you. That's you. That is who you are. And our job is to figure out what's blocking us from allowing us to feel safe enough and vulnerable enough and powerful enough to let the petals of that flower open and let something real out. Because your mind goes, no. What if they don't love you back? I mean, I used to give seminars 30 years ago, I would have people raise their hand and say, how many of you feel like you love your husband and your spouse? Everybody said, oh yeah, of course I love my husband and my spouse. I go, how many of you hold back loving your husband and your spouse? Everybody raises their hand. I go, okay, well, let's dive into that. Like why, if you love them, why are you not taking action on that love? And of course, there were all kinds of reasons, but it was just an illusion that your mind creates that there's something that you would lose, when in reality, you would gain everything.
Yeah. So we try to regulate it for protective measures, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back a little bit. This is so beautiful. I'm just loving listening and being absorbed in all of this, just immersing myself in everything that you're saying, and I'm sure that our listeners are as well. I'm going to go back a little bit to the photons and intention and the carrying of information and what we dial into. And I think people really want to understand, if I set an intention, how is that different than meditating and receiving and perceiving what is here? When I'm dialing into something in particular, the relationship between driving, over driving it with the mind versus receiving and perceiving and being available to the energies that are moving right through us all the time. The value of that is immeasurable. But I want to just touch a little bit on the mechanism of making that distinction for people in their mind of how to know that I am doing that. Am I driving it? Am I trying to drive my visions and my dreams, or am I available to the infinite possibility that is here with this constant stream, this constant flow of this information that is moving through my system? How can I know that I'm tapping into what is meant for me in my highest versus if I'm driving it or thwarting it or distorting it in some way? How do I know that I'm not getting in my own way?
Yeah, and I think that's the mechanism of meditation is to, when you first start meditating, the thoughts start going crazy and you're thinking about this, what I got to do today, we got to do all these things. But ultimately, and when you sleep, the same thing, you go through a review of the day's activity and what you're going to do tomorrow before you actually go into deeper sleep and REM sleep. So that's sort of normal, and it's fine to do that. But the idea is to on a regular basis allow yourself to drop down below that, so that becomes also part of your reality. Like if you're sitting, if you're in the forest and you're in this calm environment, like our ancestors, they didn't have anything other than a forest, and they're entrained. Their whole rhythms and their whole consciousness was entrained with those rhythms. They could persistence hunt and know and feel where the herd that they had to hunt, even 5-10 miles away, they knew where they were. Like you and I would go out to I have no idea where. So they had this knowingness that came from this connection. So, like I said earlier, it's the difference between thinking and feeling. And I think what we want to do is keep dipping the cloth in the dye of feeling your own bliss. And that's where you said it so beautifully. Love is such a great mechanism for that. So, for example, I'll tell you a story that I had a patient of mine years ago, and she had a husband who smoked pot every day. They had 4 kids. She raised them. She took them to school, made all the money. Every day she'd come home, he smoked pot every day. He had no job. And the house was a disaster. The fields weren't mowed. Fences were just repaired. Dog pen a disaster. The house was just, and she would yell, scream to get him to get a job, get a life, and engage, and he was just like, no. So I asked her, I said, do you love this guy? She said, yeah, I love him. I said, well, I'm really curious to know what it is you love about this guy, because it doesn't sound that lovable to me. I said, so I want you to go home tonight and write a love letter to him that he doesn't get to read. It's just for you to write about all the things. So you said you love him, so let's find out what that is. So I said, and when you write that love letter, I want you to ask yourself, how does it feel to write that love letter? How does it make you feel when you write about the things you love? Because you've been yelling and screaming and yelling and screaming, and he's not getting any better by the yelling and screaming. Your mind said, if I take my love away, he'll want not to be yelled at and he'll get better. Well, it didn't happen. He just got worse. So she wrote the letter, came back the next day, said, how was it? She goes, it was so hard. I have so much resentment. But when I finally got down to the level of what I really love and appreciate about him, why I married him, is I still love him and I care for him. And when I wrote about that stuff, I felt sort of expanded. I felt a level of bliss. I felt warm and fuzzy inside. It felt great. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. So him changing and fixing the yard and all this stuff, getting a job, stop smoking pot, that had nothing to do with your happiness. You got happy by writing a love letter. It was all inside of you. You had the capacity to do it yourself. So I said, why don't we take all the things that made you happy and blissful and have a feeling of bliss and put it into action. So I want you to go home and start acting on those things that made you happy, not the things that make you unhappy. And she started doing that. And this is when I had a retreat center. She was in a retreat with us, and she lived just like a half hour away up in the mountains. So she just started, I think she was going back and forth a little bit, and she did communicating and emailing and texting and just saying, I love you. And it's just simply like, saying, I just want to tell you that I love you. And I'm so grateful for having you in my life. But not like, and would you pick up some groceries on the way home? no, there's no ask or manipulation here,
Right.
It's
Just
just
love.
complete, just a love, like the eudaimonic thing with that study.
Uh,
And that study came true because she did that for a weekend, and she came in on a Monday morning, I think it was, and she came in. I said, "How you doing?" And she goes, "It was a miracle." I said, "What do you mean a miracle? What happened?" She goes, "Well, I've been doing the loving thing this whole time and just giving." And she said, "I drove home to see him. I hadn't seen him in a week, and the fields were mowed, the fences were repaired, sprinklers were working, the dog pen clean. I hadn't seen my house like that clean in 10 years." And I said, "Well, how did you feel?" She said, "I don't really know. I just felt so nice to see the house clean and everything." And I said, "How do you think he felt?" She says, "Well, he cleaned the yard. I'm not really sure." I said, "He felt safe. He felt safe enough to let the petals of his flower open and let something real out. He wasn't feeling manipulated by you yelling at him to get him to change. It was a form of, and then if you become the way I want you to be, then of course I'll love you," is full on manipulation. And think about how many of us do that in a really subtle way in our own
yeah.
life without even knowing it. And, um, and he ended up continued that, and he ended up getting a job. Literally, true. He bought a bar in Boulder, a rooftop bar. Anyway, but a beautiful story. And I had one other patient of mine who said, "So you want me to love my mother, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you love her, right?" He goes, "Yeah, I love her, but if I love her the way you want me to love her, she'll move in with me." And I'm going like, "No, she won't. She's just trying to get you to feel loved by you. That's all she wants. And if you would just let your heart open and give her a little bit instead of, pushing her away all the time, then she'd probably be content just by feeling that love, right?"
Yes. How extraordinary. It's so beautiful, so beautiful. I know that everyone that is listening right now is ear to ear smiles because we get it, right? People get this. They understand. And the beauty of what we're discussing is that the science that we were discussing previous is this. This is that. It's people don't realize that when you assign the quality of love to it, you're generating coherence inside the system. You're generating a photon emission that is going to be supportive to longevity and to healing and to upliftment, clearly. And just the story that you're sharing, it not only is affecting these outward actions, but the internal experience, both of those people's lives was so greatly improved by someone taking the initiative to allow for the unfolding to be safe, to be driven by the internal experience that I have when I just choose to love you unconditionally. Everything begins to align with that. And that's the photon
Mm.
frequency that we're dialing into, and that's what gathers and develops a reality based upon that very vibration that we are taking a stand for. And you say it so eloquently. It's just so beautiful.
Can
So
I add
beautiful.
something to that?
Yeah.
You know, I'm still in practice, and I see patients, and most of my patients that I've seen for many, many years, they're healthy. They eat a pristine diet. They eat seasonally. They do everything right. And they go to their doctor, and the doctor says, "You have high cholesterol and you need to go on a statin." And this is just like the epidemic of our time. Or you have high blood pressure, or you have high blood sugar, you have what's called metabolic syndrome. So I was like, this is crazy. What is the underlying factor here? So I started digging into the research of insulin resistance and high blood pressure and high cholesterol and low HDL and high LDL and abdominal obesity and all these factors that are really cultural now. And it turned out that I wrote an article about the mechanism of how stress impacts insulin resistance, how stress impacts blood sugar, blood pressure, high cholesterol, everything, and how stress is the elephant in the room. And what I'm talking about is that underlying rev of our culture, the constant go, 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 compared to like talked about our ancient ancestors who there wasn't a lot to do. Maybe you get chased by a lion once in a while, but for the most part, it's pretty chill when you're in nature. The animals are pretty chill. And they entrained that silent rhythm. And that's what meditation is. It's sort of a biohack for, when the first civilization started to arise, the people who were smart enough to realize that we lost our silence because when I'm in the woods, or in my cave, which is why they went to the cave. They wanted to restore that silence, because that silence gave them access to what you're talking about.
Mm.
But it also gives access to a level of self-awareness. When the body is aware, it's aware of the problem as a problem, and it can spontaneously heal that problem. But when you're constantly have this incoming, you don't have that level of self-awareness. You don't have the ability to recognize the problem as a problem. You don't have the ability to heal properly. So the body starts to inflame. It starts to get all these mechanisms of stress causing metabolic syndrome. And the elephant in the room nobody's talking about is this world we live in, the cell phone that we do this on, the constant exposure to other people trying to manipulate you to get into your pocketbook and make you buy something or
Mm.
whatever. It's just sort of amazing. And when I wrote that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the reality of this situation. And that's
Mm.
why meditation, just for living a long life is important, because you need a long life to figure all the other stuff we're talking about out. Like it takes a while to like
Mhm.
when you get into that last third of your life, or the second half of your life, you're hardwired for a spiritual life and
Mm.
to thin that veil even better. But if you've got aches and pains in your body, that makes it a
Right.
little more difficult. And so
Yeah.
that's the really, or you're on a medication that just numbs your senses and your sense awareness. It's like that makes it even more difficult. So it's a slippery slope we live in, but I kind of feel like this pendulum of outer manipulation and sensory stimulation and satisfied by the outside world, that pendulum has to start shifting to becoming aware of something that is so much more profound and so much more real than what we're being exposed to.
Yes, we were speaking about just feeling so blessed just before we started our conversation on the air today, and I know that is what has guided me. I feel younger and more alive every year that passes. I feel more connected and more enlivened and more embodied in terms of everything that I've been experiencing in the last 25 years. It has been since the first openings and awakenings started happening in my life, and I know that this is what we're speaking about right now is what is generating that life experience. And until people find that and drop into this natural rhythm that is aligning us with true nature, our true nature, in under cosmic law and alignment and connectedness there, until we do that, we age and we suffer. And so what we're trying to do here always on the Art of Awakening is to just bring people into this awareness from one avenue or another or another. And John, you are definitely lighting it up today. So I would love to have you back again. In fact, there's many things that you've mentioned that I want to go back in and unpack from the mechanism, the science behind it, and get into the nitty gritty. If you'll come back sometime sooner than later, I'd love to continue the conversation. Absolutely. I
Love to.
know that we're kind of closing in on our time. Is there any last thing that you'd like to share with our listeners? And then I'm gonna let them know how they can connect with you. Is there any last ideas, thoughts that you want to share today?
Well, I think I mean, how do we get started with the lifestyle? And I think the first way to get started is to, now that it's spring moving into summer, if when we launch this podcast, um, the sun is up early and it's available to us. And I would just sort of see if you can make a habit of getting up before the sunrise and being there for the sunrise. The science behind that is mind-boggling. An exclusive dose of red and infrared light, which
Mm.
activates an enzyme in your skin called the cytochrome C oxidase enzyme, which activates the mitochondria, which produces energy throughout the day, combats inflammation, gives melatonin. It actually allows you to produce more melatonin at night. And it also, that same infrared light heals your body. And in the DNA world, inside your cell, there's that mitochondrial energy that makes ATP, energy. But when you make that energy, there's a pretty significant amount of free radical damage. Like when you make nuclear energy, there's waste. What do you do with it? Bury it? How do you get rid of the waste? Well, your body's got the same problem. And it
Mm.
turns out that the red and infrared light that you get exclusively in the morning hours, no UV light at that time, that activates the same enzyme, the cytochrome C oxidase enzyme, to activate the production of the antioxidant that's inside your cell. And the name of that antioxidant, surprisingly, is melatonin. And that melatonin, which is the body's most powerful antioxidant, stays inside of your cell, swabbing up all the DNA damage, allowing you to produce more coherent photon emissions, right? Otherwise, you
Mm.
just got DNA damage all over the place. And
Yeah.
as you age, you produce less of that melatonin inside the cell and less mitochondrial energy. So, so that and that melatonin is 90% of the melatonin in your body, and the melatonin that puts you to sleep at night is only 10%. So there's so much we don't know about the body, but that's one thing I would highly recommend that we do to start this process is be aware of that first junction point. Synchronize your watches between biological clocks turning off for the nighttime, turning on for the daytime at that moment when the sun rises and hits your face. It's a magical thing.
Mm. That it is indeed. I was watching it this morning and just being, not just watching it, being in it, being absorbed into it is that cellular connection that happens right there is truly what is enlivening us in so many ways. So thank you for that reminder for everyone to be able to align themselves with the truth of life. This beautiful, beautiful experience that we have. So, John, how can people find you? What can they do? What is there anything that you'd like to share there? We're going to print some links, of course, in the show notes for people regarding your latest research and writings and that kind of thing. What else can you share about how people can connect?
Well, my website is lifespa.com, lifespa.com, and there I've written over 1,500 articles on ancient medical wisdom and modern science, so they're all scientifically referenced for you. It's a library. Go in there, type your health concern, and read a scientific ancient wisdom article with videos there to kind of see what the ancients would do. And when you have ancient wisdom that's thousands of years old, and it's still around, I think there's some value to that. But when you have science as well to prove it, I really feel like there's something we should all know about. Because,
Mm.
coffee's good, coffee's bad. No one, science can prove really whatever it wants. But when you have the two together, it's worth looking at. And that's what we do at lifespa.com. And you can sign up for our newsletter. We put out knowledge like this 3 times a week with videos. We have a great library there it's all for free. Our business model is give the knowledge away for free. And then we have an Ayurvedic store. I formulated many Ayurvedic herbs, and I have books and tapes and knowledge and the whole Ayurvedic skincare, set there. That's at our store as well. So you can go there. But the real juice is in the knowledge, and that's what we have there. And of course, I'm on all the social media channels. You can follow me there as well. And usually I'm giving you like a 1-minute little snippet about a really deeper article that you can go to and really dive deep into, a body of knowledge or a health concern that you might have. So yeah, come join us, be a part of our family. It's a pretty cool place.
Ah, beautiful. I can attest to that. Oh, excellent. Thank you again so much for being here, John. It's been wonderful connecting with you again, always. And I know many of our listeners may be connecting with you for the first time, but it won't be the last time. So we'll see to it. We'll have you back and continue the conversation. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to say to everyone here, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and stay connected and share it with your friends and family. And it's been a joy to be with you again here today. And I know that you'll enjoy Dr. John Douillard for days to come. So until next time, many, many blessings to you all. I'm Dr. Sue Morter. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye for now. Namaste.